This is not a good faith argument. This is not a good faith answer, you know? And that's when it started dawning on me, okay, I began to notice a pattern. And I think maybe I didn't even realize I was noticing a pattern yet, but this is the pattern that started then and then propagated itself throughout my entire deconstruction. And that is, there's a type of answer that someone gives when their allegiance is to the truth that they need to be true. And there's a type of answer that people who are actually interested in the truth give. And what I kept finding is that Christian apologetics, really consists of people who are like, well, the truth cannot be questioned. The truth, we've predetermined that this is true. And now we've got to find a way to buttress that truth.
Rhett is basically saying that Christian apologetics is biased. And you know what? He's right. Christian apologetics is biased. But bias is not a dirty word. Bias is not inherently wrong, and bias does not automatically equate to bad faith reasoning and dogmatism. Bias is in our brains and baked into our environments from early in childhood. But having bias does not mean that we are destined to be bad people. I am assuming here, but I have reasons to believe, based on the video, that Rhett's deconstruction is based on searching for unbiased perspectives. However, psychology today makes it clear that everyone has some degree of bias. It's human nature to assign judgment based on first impressions. Also, most people have a lifetime of conditioning by schools, religious institutions, their families of origin, and the media. However, by reflecting critically on judgments and being aware of blind spots, individuals can avoid stereotyping and acting on harmful prejudice. So in this video, we are going to clear the air. We are going to correct the misconception that bias in Christian apologetics makes it unreliable and untrustworthy. Hi, I'm Lyra. I'm a Christian communicator, and I'm all about helping ordinary believers like me become more rooted in Christ through the ABCs: apologetics, Bible literacy, and Christian living. Bias. The modern connotation for bias in the social media public square is departure from objectivity, prejudice, personal beliefs, and discrimination and unfairness. It also doesn't help that the current definition of bias, according to Merriam-Webster, is an inclination of temperament or outlook, especially a personal and sometimes unreasoned judgment, prejudice. However, in 1828 and 1913, Webster's definition of bias, it simply means a leaning of the mind, propensity or prepossession toward an object or view, not leaving the mind indifferent, bent, inclination. But actually, if we go back to the current definition of bias, we will find this. Bias also means bent or tendency. Let's find out the definitions of bent and tendency. Bent, a strong inclination or interest. Bias. Tendency, a proneness to a particular kind of thought or action. So, the current definition of bias and tendency actually mirror the 1828 and 1913 Webster's definition of bias, which is the leaning of the mind. Unfortunately, our modern culture has attached a very negative denotation and connotation to the word bias. Bias simply means our bent, our tendency of thinking and interpreting things in a certain way. I am a Filipino, so my tendency is to prioritize social harmony and collectivism. We call this pakikisama in the Philippines. But most Americans' tendency is to prioritize individualism. This bent, tendency, bias of how people relate to their society based on their backgrounds is not inherently prejudiced or unreasonable, although extremes are always unhealthy and harmful. What I'm trying to say is that we may claim that we don't have biases, but actually we use biases as starting point for making our decisions. Another example, I am introverted, so my tendency is to avoid attending social gatherings consecutively. So if you are a Filipino who is also introverted, you know the struggles, right? Now, going back to Christian apologists, of course, Christian apologists have bias, and Christian bias generally means that it's the inclination to be in favor of Christianity. That's the leaning, that's the tendency, that's the bent. Just think about your favorite artist. Of course, your tendency is to speak well about your favorite artist, to endorse them to other people, and to defend them against those who criticize their artistic choices. In the same way, because I am a Christian, my tendency is to think positively about Christianity, to speak well about it to others, and to defend it against attack. But again, if we're going to consider the definitions, bias does not automatically equate to dogmatism and bad faith reasoning. But unfortunately, there are Christians who do use dogmatism and bad faith reasoning. And if you ever met one in person or in online, it shouldn't be that way. What we're going to do is we're going to dissect Rhett's statement so we can think critically about his claim that Christian apologetics is biased in a negative sense. Flawed reasoning number 1. Overgeneralization.
I began to notice a pattern, and I think maybe I didn't even realize I was noticing a pattern yet, but this is the pattern that started then and then propagated itself throughout my entire deconstruction. And that is, there's a type of answer that someone gives when their allegiance is to the truth that they need to be true. And there's a type of answer that people who are actually interested in the truth give. And what I kept finding is that Christian apologetics, really consists of people who are like, well, the truth cannot be questioned. The truth, we've predetermined that this is true.
It's wise to look at patterns, but it's not wise to apply a pattern in all circumstances. Remember that our observations of patterns are still limited because of many factors. We might claim we're trying to be objective and unbiased, but actually we are subject to the bias of other people, the bias of the culture and times, and to our own biases. Remember, blind spots, our biases could be in our blind spots too. And I won't deny that there are Christian apologists who sound like they have predetermined the truth by using dogmatism and bad faith reasoning, but we must not also deny that there are Christian apologists who are very curious about what the other camps say. And so they engage the other camps by using good faith reasoning. And this leads me to my next point. Flawed reasoning number 2, caricature and double standard.
And as a Christian, what I thought is we have the truth. They have the desperate attempt to be anti-God, right? We were taught that these evolutionists, these professors who are teaching this kind of stuff, like they're sinful, they're deceived. They desperately don't want God to exist. So therefore they got to come up with these ideas in order to explain them away.
I don't disagree with Rhett that there are Christians who have made caricatures of professors, scientists, and evolutionists as evil and anti-God. There are scientists who are just simply passionate about science. They have a love affair with science. And they did not start their career with the sole intent of dismantling Christianity. There are actually science people who eventually become theists in their career, while others remain agnostics and atheists, while not being antagonistic and hostile toward Christians. Remember Bradley Monton? So it's not fair to caricature professors, scientists, and the other camps as evil and anti-God. But it's also not fair, and it also shows double standard to reduce Christians to a cartoon version of people using bad faith reasoning and dogmatism to defend what Rhett calls their predetermined truths. Remember what he said earlier about Christian apologetics?
And what I kept finding is that Christian apologetics, really consists of people who are like, well, the truth cannot be questioned. The truth, we've predetermined that this is true. And now we've got to find a way to buttress that truth.
My question is, has Rhett applied the same scrutiny he used with Christians to the other camps as well? Because if not, that's double standard. There are also non-Christians who use bad faith reasoning and caricature Christians as simple-minded, ignorant, and oppressive people. Also, are there not scientists who will propose all sorts of theories such as panspermia, self-creating universe, multiverse, and selfish gene just to push out from the picture the possibility that there is intelligent design and perhaps intelligent designer? These people have predetermined that materialism is the absolute truth, that there is no God. So any scientific discovery, theory, evidence, or concept that leads to the idea of intelligent design and possibly an intelligent designer should not be entertained. Richard Lewontin's most prominent anti-God quote is, "Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Flawed reasoning number 3, false dichotomy.
And that is, there's a type of answer that someone gives when their allegiance is to the truth that they need to be true. And there's a type of answer that people who are actually interested in the truth give.
This is false dichotomy. He is presenting Christian apologists as those who give the type of answer just because they've predetermined the truth. The implication is that the other category, these people have predetermined that materialism is the absolute truth, that there is no God. So any scientific discovery, possibly the non-theists, the atheists, are those who give the type of answer out of genuine curiosity and pursuit of truth. Actually, Richard Lewontin, the one who said, "Moreover, that materialism is the absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door," he sounds like he has predetermined the truth. But wait, he's not a Christian apologist. He's an atheist scientist. See the false dichotomy here? To further illustrate my point, let's see this clip from a Harvard seminar.
Things that are really core to people's identities, right? And so we know that people who are more religious are less likely, they score lower on these sorts of tests and more intuitive based on our assessments in the lab. But we also in a recent study looked at belief change. And so what we did here is we people categorize themselves into these 4 different kind of categories. Okay, so they're not using these labels, using like actual like sentences that describe what they are. But either someone's an atheist or they're agnostic or apathetic or whatever. Although some people are agnostic and atheists, but just ignore that for now. And so they're either these categories. So you see there's a main effect, right? People who are more atheistic score higher on the cognitive reflection test. They're more analytic than people who are more theistic. But within each category, people who at some point in their life fit into a different category are more reflective than those who have always been the same thing, right? Meaning that even for theists, those who have always been theists, probably their parents were theists, they probably haven't spent that much time thinking about whether God exists or not. Those people score much lower on the CRT than people who were theists, but previously they were a bit apathetic about it, right? Because they're at some point spent some time thinking about their beliefs and they changed them, right? They applied that thinking in an analytic sort of way to their actual beliefs that are central to their kind of lives. And so you see this sort of pattern for religious belief. Christiane, you got a question?
Okay, so the truth is that you can't put people neatly into 2 categories like what just Rhett did. Like the Christian apologists are those who give the type of answer to back up their predetermined truth. And then there are other people, the atheists, who give the type of answer because of their genuine curiosity of the truth. That is false dichotomy. Those are false categories. As the researcher said, there are theists who spent time thinking about their beliefs. We can safely assume that the time spent on this thinking is devoted to a genuine pursuit of truth. So is Christian apologetics biased? Yes, 100%. So is atheism and all other isms. But is bias inherently bad? Not at all. Bias shows your worldview, your bent, and tendency of thinking and interpreting things. But of course, bias can be maladaptive, and this is the kind that we should avoid at all costs. Maladaptive biases. Biases are typically maladaptive when 1. They cause us to rely on faulty information to reach a conclusion, or 2. They do not generalize to a given situation. In both cases, biases can cause us to reach a conclusion that, when subjected to a more thorough review of the evidence, is logically fallacious. I think what a better way for everyone to do is to examine our biases and determine which ones are maladaptive. I guess this is the maladaptive bias that some Christian apologists may have. It's using science to prove that God exists. We can't use scientific evidence to prove that there is God. We can only use scientific evidence to point that God exists, not prove. Because proving God's existence is not the job description of science. Likewise, scientific evidence can't be used to disprove God's existence. Some skeptics and atheists have this maladaptive bias, which is using science as the only means of discovering truth. But science can't discover ultimate truths, such as the existence of God. Science helps us to know empirical facts, and as history has taught us, the facts that science shows us, we still misinterpret because of our biases. Which means not only Christians are subject to confirmation bias, everyone is. And it's everyone's job to avoid maladaptive biases. And we can do that by actually avoiding overgeneralizing, not reducing the other camps to oversimplified caricatures, not applying double standards, and not making false dichotomies. I guess when we do that, we'll have more dialogues, not debates. It's better to pursue truth when you're less combative. And there's another conundrum for every truth seeker. How can we be sure that the evidence we rely on, whether it supports belief in God or not, is complete, trustworthy, impartial, and draws from all relevant disciplines? Because to be honest, as someone who strives to know more about my Christian faith, I find it humanly impossible for me to have all the evidence, knowledge, and insight from all different disciplines. And I believe it's the same way for other people, whether they are believers or not. Because there are always limits to human methodology, knowledge, and perspectives. That's why Christian bias and atheist bias and all other biases, they all rest on faith and confidence on their respective presuppositions. Our society is going through epistemological crisis, the crisis of truth. But the greater concern that I see is this overconfidence. Overconfidence in thinking that our reasoning, evidence evaluation, or critical thinking alone can guarantee certainty. But this overconfidence actually leads to rigid, stiff, unexamined, maladaptive biases. So you may ask me, if no one can have all that evidence, why are you still a Christian? Aren't you just overconfident in claiming that Christianity is true? I am absolutely certain that God exists, but my faith is not based on having all the evidence. My trust in God is grounded in the evidence I do have. The fine-tuning of the universe, irreducible complexity of the DNA, archaeological artifacts, the historical reliability of the scriptures, the historicity of Jesus, the historical positive impact of the church in our civilization, and of course, the scripture itself. Of course, I know there are counter-arguments and critiques against the evidence I do have, but they are interdisciplinary enough to build a strong cumulative case. I don't believe that I need a single indefensible argument or evidence that supports Christianity. Instead, I draw from multiple lines of evidence that are like puzzle pieces that converge and reinforce each other. And they give me the rational faith to believe that Christianity gives the most rational explanation for reality, like the problem of evil, the presence of suffering, etc. But of course, not everyone is going to be convinced, and that's okay. I was a Bible skeptic before, and now I am a Christian. I changed my position, and I remained in the faith even though I was spiritually abused in my first church, but I did not leave the faith because the truth claims of Christianity changed the core of my personhood. I find Christianity to be more life-giving, more life-transforming, and more liberating than education or positive thinking or DIY spirituality. But I'm not overconfident to the point that I am going to claim that I am unbiased and that I have a single indisputable evidence for Christianity. The end of the matter is this: everyone is in their respective journeys, and we may look at the same world and one would say, oh, the world is so finely tuned, and the other would say, oh, it's a bad design. But the good thing with our respective journeys is that we can always re-examine our assumptions, our presuppositions. We can always change our positions, and we can always scrutinize our biases. But please, do not be surprised when Christians defend their faith, especially when it's framed or misrepresented as a negatively biased religion that invented Christian apologetics.
You give you give the material, you provide the material for all the Christian reaction channels.
Oh, sure.
This is what they feed off of, right? This is what they want. If we're talking about this, they want to talk about us talking about it.
Yeah.
If you speak about your deconstruction in public, of course, logically speaking, it's going to be talked about in the public square. And remember that Christians are in the public square too. By the way, Rhett, who is a former campus missionary, he mentioned that he has this theological conundrum with predestination, and he wrestled with the Bible's seeming contradiction that he needed to share the gospel when God has already elected people to be saved. And if you are like me, like most other Christians who are baffled with this question, I actually have 2 videos that will help neutralize the situation or the tension. See you there.